The radar screen in orbital station Sentinel showed 3 green dots moving closer to Earth's territory every minute. Captain Lisa sat in the dark command center and watched the alien ships approach. She had known this moment would come. Everyone on Earth had known. The scientists warned about it. The military prepared for it. Now it was happening. The Empire did not hide their movements. They came like a storm that does not care who sees it coming. Their ships were massive, much larger than anything humanity had built. They moved in perfect formation and their speed never changed. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They came as if they owned everything they saw. Lisa pressed a button on her armrest. "Connect me to Admiral right now," she said to the young officer at the communication desk. The officer's hands moved fast across the keyboard. "Admiral is ready, ma'am. Line 3. Lisa took the call. Admiral's face appeared on her screen. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Had spent the last 10 years preparing for this moment. His entire career had been built around one simple truth. The Empire would come, and when they did, Earth had to be ready to fight. "They are entering the outer boundary in 20 days, Lisa said. She did not waste time with greetings. There was no time for that now. "I know," replied. "I have the same information. What is their formation?" "Classic attack pattern. They are not trying to hide anything. They want us to see them. They want us to be afraid." Nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure we are ready. Send the alert message to all military bases on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. Every soldier needs to know we are at war as of right now. Tell civilians in the outer settlements they need to move into the deep shelters within 4 hours. I want no one on the surface after that time." Lisa began giving orders to her staff. Men and women in uniform moved with purpose. Phone calls went out. Messages flew across the solar system. Within minutes, the entire human military structure was in motion. Ships that had been in repair docks were brought online. Soldiers who had been on leave returned to their bases. Families began leaving their homes in the outer colonies to move toward the protected shelters that had been built deep underground over the past 10 years. Dr. Robert Hayes was in his office at the Earth Space Research Institute when the alert came. He was an old man now with white hair and tired eyes, but his mind was still sharp. Robert had spent his entire career studying alien psychology. He had written books about how different species thought, how they made decisions, and what made them strong or weak. His most famous work was about the Empire and how they fought wars. Robert had written that the people were organized like a machine. Every soldier did what he was told. Every commander followed the orders from above him. There was no room for thinking differently or doing things in new ways. The Empire was powerful because of this organization, but it was also weak because of it. They could not adapt quickly. They could not change their plans when things went wrong. Robert had written a long report about humanity. He said that humans were different. Humans would fight even when the chance of winning was very small. Humans would give up their own lives to save their families. Humans would sacrifice today for a better tomorrow. This was not rational. It was not logical, but it was the truth about human nature. The commanders had read this report. They did not believe it. They thought Robert was wrong. They thought that all species fought the same way. They thought that if they showed humans enough power and strength, humans would surrender. They did not understand that humans could not surrender, not when their home world was in danger. Robert left his office and went to the military command center, was waiting for him there. The two men had worked together for many years. They were old friends now. "Robert, I need your advice," said. "We cannot beat them if we fight the way they expect us to fight. We need to use our advantages." "Our advantages are small," Robert said honestly. "They have bigger ships, they have stronger weapons, they have more soldiers, but we have one thing they do not have." "What is that?" "We have nothing to lose anymore. We are fighting for our homes, our families, our very survival as a species. This is just another war. For us, this is everything. When humans have nothing to lose, we become something different. We become unpredictable. We become dangerous." Listen to this carefully. He understood what Robert was saying. The Empire thought about war in terms of strategy and power. They looked at numbers and calculated which side would win. But humans were not just numbers. Humans were people who loved their families and their home. When those things were threatened, humans fought with a kind of strength that could not be measured in weapons or ships. "I want you to work with our military leaders," said. "Help them understand how to think, show them where the enemy is weak, give us the best chance to fight back." Robert nodded. "I will do everything I can." Over the next 3 weeks, the human military prepared for war. Fighter pilots trained for combat they had never experienced. Ship captains studied battle strategies. Soldiers cleaned their weapons and said goodbye to their families. On Earth, millions of people moved into the deep shelters. These shelters were built into the rock beneath the planet's surface. They could protect people from bomb attacks. They had food and water for years. They had medical facilities and schools for children. If the surface world was destroyed, humanity could survive in these places. The day before the ships arrived, Lisa visited the main military base on the moon. She walked through the corridors and saw young soldiers preparing their weapons. They knew they might die tomorrow. They also knew that if they did not fight, they would destroy everything humans had built over thousands of years. One young pilot named James came up to Lisa. He was only 23 years old, but he had the serious face of someone who understood his duty. "Captain, will we win this war?" he asked. Lisa could have lied to him. She could have told him that victory was certain, but she did not. She raised Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Will. The ship was the largest warship in the fleet. Its weapons could destroy a planet's surface in hours. Vex had conquered 42 star systems with this ship. 42 systems full of different species, all of them now under rule. All of them had surrendered without much fighting. Vex was tall and thin, like all were. His skin was blue-gray and his eyes were large and dark. He wore the uniform of a high commander with many symbols showing his rank and his victories. When others looked at him, they saw the most powerful military leader of their entire empire. Vex believed this about himself. He had never lost a war. He had never even come close to losing. The communications officer turned to face Vex. His name was, and he had served with Vex for many years. "Commander, we are receiving transmissions from the human defense station. They are asking us to stop and turn back." Vex laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone who thought the question was very stupid. "They are asking us to turn back? We have the most powerful fleet in this sector. We have weapons that can destroy their entire military in minutes, and they are asking us to turn back." "Yes, sir, they say this is human space, and we are not welcome." "They can say whatever they want," Vex said. "Words do not matter, power is what matters. We have power, they do not. Soon they will understand this." Vex walked to the main viewing window. He could see Earth in the distance now. It was a blue and green world, much like dozens of other worlds he had conquered. The humans living on that planet were about to learn a very important lesson. They were about to learn that resisting the Empire was pointless. The strategy for conquering new worlds was always the same. First, send a warning. Tell the people they must surrender. Most species listened to this warning and gave up. But some did not listen. When that happened, they would show them the power of their weapons. Usually, a single attack on a military base or a city was enough to make people understand. Then they would surrender. Vex expected the same thing to happen with Earth. He expected that 1 or 2 attacks would be enough to break the human will to fight. The humans would see that they could not win, and they would surrender. Then the Empire would take control of Earth and add it to their great empire. "Prepare the first attack," Vex commanded. "Target the outer defense stations and the military bases. I want them destroyed. I want the humans to see that we are serious." The weapons officers began their work. On the Dominion's Will and on the other ships, weapons systems came to life. Scientists and soldiers checked their targeting systems. The aliens made sure their aim was perfect. They wanted to hit exactly what they aimed at. Vex watched his weapons officers work. They were very skilled. They were very trained. They had done this many times before. Vex felt confident. This would be easy. The humans would surrender just like all the others. But something happened that Vex did not expect. When the weapons fired at the human defense stations, the humans did not panic. They did not try to run away. Instead, they fought back. They sent fighter ships to attack the fleet. This was surprising because the human fighters were much smaller and much weaker than the ships. According to logic, these fighters should not have even tried to fight. They had no chance of winning. But the human pilots did not seem to care about logic. They flew straight at the much larger ships. They fired their weapons with great accuracy, even though their weapons were weak. When one human fighter was damaged too badly to keep flying, the pilot did something very strange. The pilot flew the damaged fighter directly into a weapon system. The fighter was destroyed, but the weapon was also destroyed. Vex watched this happen with confusion. Why would the human pilot do this? The pilot knew he would die. The pilot's sacrifice destroyed only one weapon system on one ship. From a logical point of view, this was a very bad trade. But the human pilot did not think about logic. The human pilot thought about protecting his home and protecting his people. More human fighters came. More of them flew into ships and weapon systems. Every pilot knew they would probably die. But they kept coming. They kept fighting. They kept sacrificing themselves. The officers on the bridge of the Dominions had never seen anything like this before. In all the wars they had fought, no enemy had ever done this. Other species fought because they wanted to win resources or territory. When the fight became too difficult, they stopped fighting and surrendered. But these humans were different. These humans fought because they did not have a choice. These humans fought because their families were on that planet below, and they would not let that planet be destroyed. Vex's confidence began to crack a little. He looked at his tactical officer. "How many human fighters have we encountered?" he asked. 17 so far, Commander, all destroyed." "And how much damage have they done to our fleet?" The tactical officer looked at his screen. His face showed concern. "More than we expected, sir. Weapon systems damaged. One shield generator offline. Hull breaches on 2 ships. Nothing critical, but more than we usually see in a single day of combat." Vex understood something in that moment. These humans were not like other species. These humans would fight until every one of them was dead. They would not surrender. They would not give up. They would keep fighting no matter how many times they were beaten. The commander did not panic. He was too experienced for that. But for the first time in his entire military career, Vex began to understand that his enemy might be more dangerous than he had thought. The humans had less power, less technology, and fewer ships. But they had something else. They had a kind of strength that Vex did not fully understand. Vex turned to his weapons officer. "Continue the attack," he said. "Increase the intensity. I want those human defenses completely destroyed within the next 6 hours. We will show them the true power of the Empire." In the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, Admiral watched the attack unfold on his screens. They had destroyed 3 orbital stations and damaged several military bases in the first wave of attacks. The explosions had been visible from Earth's surface. People in cities had seen the bright flashes light up the night sky. They knew that they were not bluffing. The war was real. Had known this day would come. He had prepared for it for 10 years. His military had trained for this. His people had built the shelters. His scientists had developed strategies. But knowing that something would happen and actually watching it happen were 2 different things. Watching his stations explode and knowing that human soldiers had died in those explosions made it real in a way that planning never could. "Admiral," Lisa's voice came through the communication system. She was in her ship in space, leading the human fighter response. "We have engaged the primary fleet. We have lost 18 fighters so far. We are causing damage to their vessels, but we need support." "Made a decision. Send the cruiser force now. I want them to target the flagship. If we can damage their command systems, the rest of their fleet will be confused." "That is a suicide mission, Admiral. The cruisers cannot survive a direct attack on the flagship." "I know," said. He did not say more than that. Sometimes orders did not need explanation. Sometimes soldiers understood what they had to do without being told in different words. The human cruisers accelerated toward the flagship. They were old ships, not built for this kind of direct combat, but the officers and sailors aboard them understood their job. Captain Joseph Wells commanded the cruiser Defiant. He sat in the captain's chair and watched his weapons officer prepare the attack. "Ready the main weapons," Joseph told his officer. "Everything we have, we will fire once and then we will retreat." "Captain, if we do this, they will fire back. We might not survive." "I know," Joseph said. He had made peace with death the moment he put on this uniform 10 years ago. He had made peace with it again when the war started. Now he was just doing his job. His job was to hurt the enemy. His job was to buy time for the people on Earth. The cruiser weapons fired. The attack was not strong enough to destroy the flagship, but it was strong enough to damage the primary communication system. For 18 minutes, the fleet could not communicate with its commander. For 18 minutes, the ships had to fight without clear orders from above them. This was the advantage that humans had. This was what Dr. Robert Hayes had written about in his reports. Ships could not fight without clear commands from the central authority. They were built that way. Their minds worked that way. But human ships could think for themselves. Human commanders could make quick decisions without waiting for orders from above. Human sailors could understand what they needed to do just by looking at what their enemies were doing. While the fleet was confused, human forces attacked from multiple directions. The attacks were small and could not destroy the ships, but they slowed the enemy down. They disrupted the enemy's attacks on Earth. They gave more time for human civilians to move into the deep shelters. Down on Earth in the cities, people watched the sky. They saw the bright flashes of distant battles. They heard the explosions from the orbital stations. Then they moved underground. They did what they had been trained to do. They walked into the shelters with whatever they could carry. They walked away from their homes knowing they might never see them again. A young woman named Rachel walked into a shelter with her daughter. The girl was 7 years old and did not really understand what was happening. Rachel's husband was in space, flying a fighter for the human military. Rachel did not know if he was still alive. She did not know if she would ever see him again. But she kept her daughter safe. That was what mattered now. In the military command centers, soldiers and officers worked without sleep. They kept fighting they coordinated with Lisa in space. They organized the civilian population. They tried to keep hope alive even though things looked very bad. The attack on Earth's surface began on the second day of the war. The enemy ships fired weapons at cities and military bases. The explosions were massive. Buildings fell. Fires burned across large areas. But the weapons were aimed at the surface, not at the underground shelters where the people were. The underground shelters held. This was another thing that Vex did not understand. By attacking cities and destroying infrastructure, he thought he would break the human will to fight. But the humans had already moved their population underground. By attacking the surface, Vex was destroying empty buildings and empty land. He was not destroying human lives. He was not breaking human spirits. He was only making the humans more determined to fight back. Watch the destruction of Earth's surface with pain in his heart. He loved this planet. He had been born here. He had spent his entire life protecting this world. Now large parts of it were burning, but the humans in the shelters were safe. The human military was still fighting. The war was not over. All units execute Protocol 7, commanded. Every unit in the human military knew what Protocol 7 meant. It meant they should use swarm tactics. It meant they should stop trying to fight directly. Instead, they should attack the fleet from many different angles at the same time. They should hit the weak points. They should disrupt the command structure. The human ships began their coordinated attacks. Dozens of smaller ships attacked different vessels at the same time. The ships tried to defend themselves, but they were confused. Their commander had lost communications for 18 minutes. Now he was struggling to understand what was happening. The human tactics did not make sense to him because humans did not fight like did. Captain Lisa led a small group of fighters through a gap in the defenses. She knew this attack would probably cost her ship, but the human fleet behind her needed this opening. The human fleet needed time to complete its attacks. She would give them that time. "All fighters follow my lead," Lisa said to her pilots. "We go through and we do not stop, we do not look back, we do maximum damage and we get out." The fighters moved forward, the weapons fired, human ships exploded. But Lisa's ship, and by the fourth day of the war, the situation had changed. The Empire still had more ships, more weapons, and more power. But they were losing, not in a dramatic way, not all at once. But slowly, day by day, the human military was beating them back. 17 ships had been destroyed or damaged so badly that they could no longer fight. 19 more had been hit and wounded. The fleet was smaller than it had been when it arrived at Earth. The losses were growing. And the humans who were supposed to be defeated were still fighting. Commander Vex sat in his damaged command chair on the damaged bridge of his damaged ship. The Dominions had been hit 6 times. The shields were weak. The weapons were not all working correctly. The communication systems had been repaired, but they were still unreliable. Around him, his officers worked to keep the ship flying and fighting. Vex had studied every report about human military tactics. He had read Dr. Robert Hayes' warnings about human psychology. He had ignored all of it because he believed his power was greater. But now he understood that he had been wrong. The humans had not fought the way he expected them to fight. They had not behaved the way logical species behaved. They had fought like animals protecting their nest. They had fought like parents protecting their children. They had fought like a species that knew it had no option except victory. A young officer brought a new report to Vex. The officer's face showed fear. The military did not allow officers to show emotion, but this officer could not hide his concern. "Commander, we have received the latest casualty report. 8,000 soldiers killed. Another 12,000 wounded. 3 cruisers destroyed. 10 more damaged. Weapons systems are functioning at only 80% capacity, and the human attacks continue. They do not stop, they do not rest. Vex listened to this information without speaking. He had fought many wars. He had never seen casualty numbers like this when the enemy had fewer ships and less power. Normally, when the superior force lost soldiers and ships like this, it meant they were fighting an enemy equal to themselves. But the humans had fewer ships. They had less power. They should have been destroyed by now, but they were not destroyed. They were still fighting. "What about Earth?" Vex asked. "What is the status of the human population?" "They are hiding in deep underground shelters, Commander. We have destroyed much of their surface infrastructure, but the people are safe underground. We cannot damage them with our surface weapons. We would need to use planetary bombing. That would take weeks and use enormous amounts of resources." Vex understood this problem. He could destroy Earth, but it would cost him more resources and more ships. After he destroyed Earth, he would have to return to space to recover and repair. The leadership would question why he had lost so many ships to defeat a primitive species. They would question his judgment. They might even remove him from command. This was the moment when Vex understood the full scope of his failure. He had come to conquer Earth. He had expected an easy victory. He had expected to add Earth to the Empire. Instead, he was losing soldiers, ships, and credibility. And the humans who were supposed to surrender were still fighting. In space, Lisa directed her remaining fighters toward a new target. 12 fighters had launched from Mars that morning. Only 4 would return. But those 4 would strike at a critical point in the supply line. That was all they needed to do. The humans had learned that they did not need to win big battles. They just needed to win small victories again and again and again. Lisa's ship was damaged. The right side of the hull had been hit by weapons. The shield generators were barely working, but the ship could still fly, the weapons could still fire, and that was enough. "Target locked," her weapons officer said. The young woman's name was Amy. She was only 19 years old, but she had killed more than most soldiers killed in their entire careers. "Fire," Lisa commanded. The weapons struck true. They did not destroy the ship, but they damaged the fuel transfer system. The ship would have to leave the battle to repair itself. That was a victory. That was what humans needed. Small victories added up to big ones. Below in Earth's shelters, people listened to radio reports. They heard that the fleet was being pushed back. They heard that human pilots were dying, but they were hurting the enemy. They heard that the war was not lost. Hope started to grow in the hearts of the people who had lost their homes. A young boy named David asked his mother if his father was still alive. David's father was a soldier in the Earth Defense Force. The mother did not know the answer. She held her son and told him that his father was brave and strong and that he was fighting to protect them. She did not know if this was true. She did not know if she would ever see her husband again. But her son needed hope, so she gave it to him. On Earth's surface, in the ruins of what used to be major cities, military repair crews worked around the clock. They fixed ships, they made weapons, they built new fighters in underground factories. The humans had prepared for this war for 10 years. They had hidden factories and repair facilities in places they did not know about. Every day, more ships were ready to fight. Every day, more weapons were available. The humans were not running out of resources. They were growing stronger. This was what Vex had not understood. He thought that by attacking cities and destroying surface infrastructure, he would weaken the humans. But the humans did not care about cities or buildings. The humans cared about survival. Everything they needed to survive was in the deep shelters. Everything they needed to fight was in hidden factories. The attack was destroying empty buildings while the humans grew stronger every single day. By the end of the 4th day, the human military had destroyed 5 more ships. The fleet had lost almost 1/3 of its fighting strength. The human losses were greater in numbers, but humans could replace their losses faster. The humans had their entire species united in one goal. They had a military that was far from home and getting weaker every day. Vex called his senior commanders together. They looked at him with fear and doubt. The greatest military commander of the Empire had led them into a war they were losing. Now they had to decide what to do. "We can continue this attack," Vex told them honestly. "We can eventually destroy Earth if we commit more resources and more time, but the cost will be high. We will lose more ships. We will lose more soldiers. And when we return to space, we will have to explain these losses. We will have to admit that a primitive species defeated us in battle." The commanders said nothing. They understood what Vex was saying. They understood that defeat was coming. "Or we can withdraw now," Vex continued. We can call this a strategic retreat. We can tell the leadership that we faced a stronger enemy than expected and that we chose to preserve our military strength. We can save ourselves and our remaining ships. The fleet began to move away from Earth. The ships turned around and pointed towards space. The great invasion that was supposed to add another star system to the Empire was over. The Empire had chosen to retreat rather than continue fighting. In the human command centers, the reports came in slowly. At first, nobody could believe it. They were leaving. The greatest threat that humanity had ever faced was retreating. The humans had done something that seemed impossible. They had fought against a superior force and they had won. Admiral stood in the command center and watched the ships leave. His face did not show happiness or joy. It showed exhaustion and sadness. Thousands of human soldiers had died in this war. Millions of civilians had lost their homes. Large parts of Earth's surface had been burned and destroyed. The humans had won, but the cost was very high. "Call off the attacks," said quietly. "Let them go, we have done enough." The order went out to all human military units. The fighters stopped attacking. The ships stopped firing weapons. The human military watched as the fleet moved farther and farther away from Earth. In a few days, the enemy would be out of sight. In a few weeks, they would be completely gone. Lisa stood on the bridge of her damaged ship. She had not slept in 4 days. Her uniform was dirty. Her face showed the exhaustion of war. But she was alive. Many of her pilots had not survived. Many of her friends were dead. But she was alive, and her home planet was safe. A young pilot named had flown into a weapons array and died in the explosion. A pilot named Jessica had been shot down during the final battle. A whole wing of fighters had been destroyed protecting a supply convoy. But they had not died for nothing. Their deaths had meant something. Their sacrifice had protected Earth. Lisa ordered her ship to return to orbit around Earth. As her ship approached the planet, she could see the damage. Whole cities had been burned. Forests were destroyed. The planet looked hurt and wounded. But it was still there. Humanity was still there, and that was what mattered. Below in the shelters, people heard the announcement. The war was over. They were retreating. Families who had been separated would see each other again. People who had lost their homes would need to rebuild. But they were alive. They were still human, and their planet was free. In his private quarters, Dr. Robert Hayes watched the news reports. The old scientist had been right. Everything he had written about human nature had come true. Humans would fight for their survival no matter the cost. Humans would sacrifice everything for their families and their home. Humans had a kind of strength that was not measured in weapons or ships. It was measured in will and determination and love. Robert did not feel proud about being right. He felt sad about the cost. Thousands were dead. The planet was damaged. But he understood that this was the price of survival. This was what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of enemies. Commander Vex sat alone in his private chamber on the damaged Dominion's will. He had lost this war. The greatest military commander of the Empire had fought a primitive species with inferior weapons and inferior technology, and he had lost. It was not a glorious story that would be told in schools. It was a story of failure. But Vex understood something now. He understood that the humans were not primitive. They were different. They thought differently. They fought differently. They valued different things. The Empire valued order and hierarchy and power. The humans valued family and home and sacrifice. These were two different ways of being alive in the universe. Vex had read Dr. Robert Hayes' report many times during the war. Now he understood what the human scientist had been trying to say. The report said that humans would fight until the last one was dead. It said that humans could not be defeated by power alone. It said that humans had a strength that was greater than any weapon. Vex had not believed this before. Now he believed it. Now he knew it was true from his own painful experience. The fleet traveled back towards space. Each day, Earth became smaller in the distance. Each day, the great empire moved farther from the world that had defeated it. When the fleet finally returned to the home world, there would be many questions. There would be demands for explanations. Vex would lose his position as supreme military commander. He would be demoted or removed from service. This was the price of failure in the military. But before that happened, Vex wrote a report. He wrote about the humans and their strength. He wrote about the kind of war that humans would fight. He wrote about the danger of underestimating a species because they had less advanced technology. He wrote about how will and determination could defeat power and weapons. He sent this report to the leadership. He did not know if they would read it. He did not know if they would understand it. But he had to try. He had to warn the rest of the Empire about what he had learned. On Earth, humans began the long process of recovery. They cleaned up the ruins of their cities. They built new homes. They remembered the soldiers who had died. They told stories about how they had defeated the greatest enemy that had ever come to their world. Schools taught children about the war. The children learned that humans were strong. They learned that humans could fight and win. They learned that their parents and grandparents had been willing to die to protect them, and the children understood that they were part of something important. They were part of humanity. Lisa was offered a promotion by Admiral. She turned it down. She said she wanted to go back to flying fighters. The young pilots needed leaders who understood what it meant to fight and survive. His parents received a letter from Lisa. She told them that their son had died with courage and honor. She told them that his death had saved thousands of lives. She told them that humans would remember him. In the Empire, the leadership read Vex's report. They understood that the age of easy conquests was over. They understood that there were species in the galaxy that were different from them. They understood that power alone was not enough to win all wars. Many years later, the Empire and the human species would trade with each other. They would share knowledge and technology. But they would never forget the war. The humans would never forget how they had defeated the greatest threat to their existence. They would never forget how they had been beaten by a species that valued sacrifice more than power. And in his final years, Commander Vex would write a book about the war and about human nature. He would try to help his people understand that strength came in many different forms. He would try to help them see that not all power could be measured in weapons and ships. Some power came from within. Some power came from the will to survive. Some power came from love of home and family. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from the war, and the lesson was simple. Never underestimate humanity. Never believe that inferior technology means inferior strength. Never think that will and determination do not matter, because humanity would always fight. Humanity would always sacrifice, and humanity would always find a way to survive. Still, the commanders said nothing. They looked at each other with uncertainty. Vex made the decision himself. He was the commander. It was his responsibility. "We withdraw," he said finally. "All ships will begin movement towards space. This war is over." D5 others made it through. They fired their weapons at the command ship. The attack damaged the enemy's systems even more. And then Lisa turned her ship around and led her remaining fighters back to safety. Vex watched all of this from the bridge of his flagship. The great empire was in a battle it did not expect to win quickly. The humans were not fighting like the other species Vex had fought before. The humans were not trying to match power. They were doing something different. They were using their own kind of strength. And for the first time in his military career, Vex understood that he might lose this war. But as Vex gave these orders, a small doubt had planted itself in his mind. He had read the report from Dr. Robert Hayes about human nature. At the time, he had thought the report was wrong. Now he was beginning to wonder if the old human scientist had been right all along. Now he was beginning to wonder if entering Terran space had been a mistake. This young man too much to lie to him. "I do not know if we will win," she said, "but I know we will fight, and sometimes that is enough." James smiled a little. He did not look happy, but he looked resolved. He looked like a human soldier who was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect his home. On the final night before the arrival, the command center was quiet. Lisa stood alone and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the alien ships were coming closer. Tomorrow, people would die. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight on Earth, people slept knowing that their military would fight for them, and that gave them hope.